Welcome to Lose Lips, all the things you wanted to say but didn't know how to say it. Today's topic is Russia threatens Washington with nukes. There have been some reports and threats of a possible space-based nuclear satellite weapon that could be used by Russia against its enemies. I was actually surprised when I heard this, and Russia has stated that the points of nuclear locations have already been plotted, with Washington, D.C. being one. Sure, Russia has stated a lot of things that have not turned out to be true, but for them to come out with this is another thing altogether. Not only is it insane to make public, but it also stirs up controversy in a time where this already happens to be a lot of conflict. It amazes me that statements such as this are being made, and yet Congress is still having a hard time approving aid for Ukraine. I often wonder a lot how much and what will it take before Congress realizes that Russia is not dealing with the full deck upstairs? Will it take for us to be hit before they start saying, oops, we need to get ready? No, the time to get ready is now. Put Russia in its place so they will stop making comments like this. It is alarming that rhetoric is allowed to continue with Congress taking such a soft approach, and it will come to our front door if we don't take a hard stance to make it stop now. According to these reports, Russia has actually tested a satellite weapon that could launch a nuclear warhead from orbit and detonate it in the atmosphere, creating an electromagnetic pulse that could damage or destroy electronic devices and infrastructure on the ground. This weapon is considered to be indiscriminate and dangerous, as it could affect civilians and allies as well as military targets. True, there have been statements after the fact that it has not been done, but it is in the process of finishing. Not only would this be a huge violation of international space, but if it were to be, then the outcome would be catastrophic. Then would Congress say, oh, okay, yeah, they did something. Should we stop them now? Or would they still be arguing over aid and what they should and should not do to provoke the situation further? The U.S. government has actually expressed concern and condemnation over this weapon and has urged Russia to refrain from deploying or using it. The U.S. has also said that it is prepared to defend itself and its allies from any attack and that it would respond with overwhelming force if necessary. Hearing this statement makes me mad because it is just talk, speech, no action. Here, they have stated, Russia has actually stated, this is what we are doing. And all we say and respond is that we will respond and strong. But hey, what do I know? Yeah, these words will make Russia stop. After all, they have stopped before, right? Not at all. They don't care for words. We have to show them and show them hard that we mean business. The situation between Russia and the US is very tense and volatile, especially in light of the ongoing war in Ukraine, where Russia has invaded and occupied parts of the country. The US and its allies have supported Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and have imposed sanctions after sanctions and pressure on Russia to end the aggression. The war in Ukraine has also raised the risk of a nuclear confrontation, as both sides have nuclear weapons and have not ruled out using them in case of a worst case scenario. A close ally of Russian President Putin has even threatened to use nuclear weapons on Washington and other cities if Ukraine and its allies manage to push Russia out of the country Ukraine. So basically, Russia is saying if they lose, they will push those buttons. This is pure manipulation, and I really don't understand how Congress can let a statement like this pass without taking further action. Russia has already lost millions in terms of revenue. The smartest people are and have left the country. Their men are dying in the war. What will it take? So Russia wants to take control over Ukraine, and then they won't push the button. Come on. Why would Congress take a statement such as that lying down? Give Ukraine the aid they need to stop this madness. Stop arguing over stupid things and stop being little brats and do what the people ordered and voted you to do. There is a serious crisis going on in Ukraine, and it is not the time to argue over aid to Ukraine and Israel. I have never been more embarrassed and ashamed of the elected officials in my life. And let me tell you, when it comes to our doorstep, do we forgive you that we voted in? No, we won't. We will remember that this could have been avoided if you had behaved and done what you were supposed to do in the beginning instead of waiting until the last minute. It seems that Russia has a large and diverse nuclear arsenal and has threatened to use it in response to the war in Ukraine. However, many experts and analysts have argued that Russia is unlikely to use nuclear weapons as it would face severe consequences and risks, such as retaliation, escalation, isolation, and condemnation, and maybe even Russia will be wiped out. They also suggest that Russia's nuclear threats are mainly intended to deter, intimidate, or bargain with the West, and to boost its domestic support and legitimacy. There have also been some that debate the quality and maintenance of such an arsenal, but we really don't know, and we don't want to find it out. But it is also obvious that Russia does not care about isolation, condemnation, sanctions, and consequences. Therefore, one possible interpretation is that Russia will not use nuclear weapons unless it feels that it has no other option or that it is under imminent attack. However, this is not a certain or guaranteed outcome, as there are many factors and uncertainties that could affect Russia's decision and behavior. So, with all of this going on, why does Russia hate the West? Now, in history, Russia has a long and turbulent history of conflicts and wars with Western powers, such as the Napoleon Wars, the Crimean War, the World Wars, and the Cold War. These events have shaped Russia's perception of the West as a hostile and threatening force, and have fostered a sense of fear and insecurity among Russians. But if you notice, many Russians, or I should say the average Russian, does not travel outside the country. So they really don't know any better, and Putin likes to keep the Russians stupid. Transition. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia underwent a difficult and painful transition to a market economy and democratic system, which was influenced by Western models and advisors. Many Russians felt disappointed and betrayed by the West as they faced economic hardship, social turmoil, and political instability. They also resented the West for exploiting Russia's weakness and expanding its influence and interest in the former Soviet space. Now, if history repeats itself, Russia will collapse again after the Ukraine war. Its economic outlook is bleak after turning its economy now into a war economy. And this is the same thing that collapsed or was a figure in the collapse of the USSR. Values. Russia has a distinct cultural and civilizational identity, which is based on Orthodox Christianity. Slavic traditions, and imperial legacy. Many Russians see the West as a source of moral decay and cultural erosion, as they perceive Western values such as liberalism, democracy, human rights, multiculturalism as incompatible or threatening to their own values and interests. Politics. Russia has a strong and assertive leader in Vladimir Putin, who has consolidated his power and popularity by portraying himself as a defender of Russia's sovereignty and dignity against the West. Putin has accused the West of meddling in Russia's internal affairs, supporting its enemies, and encircling it with military alliance and bases. Putin has also used anti-Western propaganda and rhetoric to rally his domestic support and to justify his foreign policy actions, such as the annexation of Crimea and the intervention in Syria and Ukraine. Putin is paranoid, and rightly so. If his public were to get out and see how the other half lived, then they would probably revolt. When will the U.S. understand that the Ukraine war affects us all? Now, the United States has been involved in the Ukraine war since it started in 2022, when Russia invaded and occupied parts of the country. The U.S. has supported Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and has provided it with military, economic, and diplomatic assistance. The U.S. has also imposed sanctions and pressure on Russia to end the aggression. However, some critics and analysts have argued that the U.S. has not done enough to help Ukraine or to deter Russia, and that the U.S. does not fully understand or appreciate the consequences and implications of the war for its own interest and security. This statement is very true, in that if you look at the reasons Ukraine is fighting, they are fighting for their sovereignty, they are fighting for democracy, and to rid themselves of Putin. It should not matter that Ukraine is on its doorstep. This goes to say, and understand this, that Putin is afraid. He is afraid for his borders. He is afraid that his people will see alternatives to the propaganda that he is spreading. His people will find out that he is a liar and deceptive. Now, some of the possible impacts of the war on the United States are economic. The war has driven up global commodity prices, especially oil and gas, which are vital for the U.S. economy. This has fueled inflation and weighed on U.S. economic growth. The war has also disrupted trade and investment between the U.S. and Europe, as well as with Russia and its allies. The war has also increased the risk of a global recession or financial crisis. Political. The war has strained the U.S. relations with its allies and partners, especially in Europe and NATO, who have different views and interests on how to deal with Russia and Ukraine. The war has also exposed the U.S. to criticism and challenges from its rivals and adversaries, such as China and Iran, who have exploited the situation to advance their own agendas and influence. The war has also polarized the U.S. domestic politics and public opinion, as different parties and groups have different opinions and preferences on how to handle the war. Security. The war has increased the risk of a nuclear confrontation, as both Russia and the U.S. have nuclear weapons and have not ruled out using them in case of a worst case scenario. The war has also increased the risk of a cyber attack, as both sides have used cyber warfare to sabotage and spy on each other. The war has also increased the risk of a terrorist attack, as some extremist groups have exploited the chaos and violence to recruit and operate. These are just some of the possible effects of the war in the U.S., but there may be other factors or scenarios that are not obvious or predictable. Therefore, it is more important than ever for the U.S. to monitor the situation closely. I personally don't want to wait for the war to come to our doorstep. I am in favor of sending everything we have to the front for Ukraine, and we should train them as well in any way possible. Congress needs to stop placing personal views and being little bots for Russia. Take control of our country and do what you know is right. That's all for today. Thank you for listening to Lose Lips, and until the next time.